Hey, this is Joe Hubbard from JoeHubbardBassVideos.com coming at you today with another lesson. And this is the third lesson in my Polyrhythms course. Today's lesson is on the major 7th chord, so with that in mind, grab your bass and let's get started. It's important to understand that the 8th note is the rhythmic subdivision for jazz, but the polyrhythmic phrasing is created by how we group these 8th notes. Remember that syncopation is created by displacing the accents in a rhythmic phrase where it places an emphasis on beats that were originally weak. In the Western classical system, the first of every 2 8th notes falls on the downbeat. But by accenting every third 8th note, a change occurs that opposes the placement of the basic pulse. In actual application, much of the syncopated tension against the basic pulse is resolved after 4 to 8 bars. We use this as a dynamic device to create an inside-outside effect. For further reference, make sure that you start listening to the recordings of the Miles Davis Quintet, preferably the Sorcerer, Miles Smiles, Nefertiti, and ESP. As this lesson will focus on the major 7th chord, let's go ahead and take a look at harmonizing the Lydian mode in triads. The Lydian mode's formula is the root, the 2nd, the 3rd, the sharp 4, 5, 6, and the 7. When harmonizing the scale in triads, we're going to end up with this formula. Off the root, we're going to have a major triad. Off the 2nd, we're going to have a major. Off the 3rd, we're going to have a minor. Off the sharp 4, we're going to have a diminished. Off the 5, we're going to have major. Off the 6, we're going to have minor. And off the 7, we're going to have minor. When we come back to that root an octave above, that goes back to a major. Remember to practice slowly and count out loud in order that you learn how to feel these polyrhythmic phrases correctly. Before we start to take a look at this harmonized Lydian mode, let's look at the actual Lydian mode first. Now the Lydian mode is derived from the major scale from the 4th degree. And what's important about the Lydian mode is that it possesses all of the notes within the major 7th chord and all of the tensions that are available over a major 7th chord, which are going to be 9, sharp 11, and 13. So it's a good scale to learn because it globally fits any major 7th chord. So if I look at the scale, I've got the root, I've got the 2nd, I've got the 3rd, I have the sharp 4, I have the 5, the 6, and the 7. And then we play that scale back down. And it's always good to just understand this from the vantage point of getting that sound in your head. But the application of scales, we don't want to just run scales up and down. We want to do more interesting things with them. So that's why we're taking these polyrhythm exercises and then we're harmonizing the scales, because the essence of that scale or that sound is coming out, and it's also influencing the way that it sounds over that major 7th chord, because we've got all the chord tones present and the available chord tensions that we can use on the major 7th chord. So when I start to harmonize the scale in diatonic triads, the first one is going to be a major triad. Off of the 2nd degree, I've got another major triad. Off the 3rd degree, I have a minor triad. From the sharp 4, I've got a diminished. From the 5th, I have a major triad. From the 6th, I have a minor triad. And from the 7th, I have a minor triad. And then I'm back to the root an octave above, and this is a major triad. So again, what we want to do, slowly play through them. When I go back down, I want to keep this ascending structure on each one of the triads. And that really brings out that sound of major, and we got all those accompanying tensions that go with it. So once you get the formula down and you understand what you're playing, and really analyze this in regard to the chord tones and tensions. So you start to understand that if I play a G major triad over a C major 7th chord, that what I'm actually getting out of that, I'm getting the 5th of the C major 7, I'm getting the 7th, and then I'm getting the 9. Okay, if I play a B minor triad over the C major 7, then I'm getting a 7, I'm getting the 9, and I'm getting that sharp 11 there. So it brings out that specific character of that chord. When you want it, you can then tap into it that way. If you just learn it as a disconnected series of patterns, then it's never going to really mean that to you, and you're not going to be able to tap into it and then learn to play what you hear. That's the catch with all of that. So really, through your practice, always be associating those notes with the notes that are in the chord, and also the accompanying tensions that are available over the major 7th chord. With that said, what we need to do now is we need to learn how to count this and play this where we're playing it in 8th notes, and by the mere nature that we're using triads, that root note of each triad is accenting the first of every 3 8th notes, and that gives us that cool jazz sound. You need to start listening to some jazz recordings to hear this. Good place to start is with things like Oleo by Sonny Rollins, and also Billy's Bounce by Charlie Parker. Later on, we might be analyzing a few of these things, so I want you to jumpstart this by going out and seeking these things out and listening, seeing if you can hear some of these polyrhythmic ideas within just those melodies of those songs, and then start to try to identify that within solos and extended improvisations by jazz musicians. So what we're going to do is we're now going to play this in 8th notes, and we're going to count it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, I want to put it into that 8-bar phrase, because the actual application of these things, as you'll hear once you start hearing it where people use it in their solos, is they might use it for 4 bars and then resolve it back to something a little bit straighter, and it gives it that dynamic tension that's needed. So once you start to incorporate this idea into your own playing, you'll have all these various concepts that you can use, chromaticism, diatonic approach notes, the polyrhythm ideas. We're going to be starting to, the next course is going to go into scale passing tones. I've already shown you a little bit about that, but we're going to go into a detailed course. With those under your belt, you really have the foundation for most of what you need in the vocabulary of improvisation. Everything that we build on top of that will just be extending it a little bit further. We also added in the tensions, didn't we? So we had that lyrical phrasing in there. So all of those elements wrapped up into one thing, where you're going in and out of all of those things, creates diversity, and that also keeps your listener engaged. So this is something that's mega important for you to do when you're practicing. So try to keep that in mind when you do this. So what I want you to do is get this down, come back, play along with the play along, but make sure that you're taking these things through all the keys. By now you should be getting the understanding of how to do this, but because we're introducing a new chord type, it becomes different, and you've got to deal with the melodic content that is happening with these different chords and the different scale choices that we're using to accompany them. So get that together, come back, and we'll move on to the next thing. this next evolution, what we're going to take a look at is subtracting all of the roots from each one of these diatonic triads from the Lydian mode. So what I want to do is take a look at each triad individually and then subtract the root. And the resulting notes are going to end up in my line. So what I do is I take the first one, which is the C major triad. I want to subtract the C, which is the root, so I'm going to end up with E and G, which gives me a minor third interval. Okay. The next triad is going to be D major. I subtract the D, and that ends up with F sharp and A, which is a minor third. Okay, then what I end up with is the E minor triad. I get rid of the E and I end up with G and B, which is a major third. Then I have F sharp diminished. I get rid of the F sharp and I end up with A and C, which is a minor third. Then I go to G major. I subtract the G and I end up with B and D, which is a minor third. My next chord is A minor. I subtract the A, or the root, and I end up with the C and the E. That's a major third. The next chord is a B minor. I subtract the root, which is B, and I end up with D and F sharp, which is a major third. And then the last chord is going to be a C major triad. I subtract the root, which is C, and I end up with E and G, which is a minor third. So what happens now is that I end up with this succession of diatonic thirds starting on the third of the actual chord. So what happens rhythmically when I subtract that root is that I'm going to start on the upbeat, because that was the downbeat. So if I'm counting, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the process that I've just gone through thoroughly of how we end up with that, and also how that ends up with that rhythmic sequence. You're going to hear a lot of guys using this all the time in their playing. Dizzy Gillespie comes to mind of using these exact rhythms. Charlie Parker, McCoy Tyner. It's part of the jazz language. You need to understand it. And this sort of takes you a little out of your comfort zone, because you've got the triads, you've got to start subtracting notes, so you still have to relate it to the original chord, which is the major 7 that we're working on, and you have to be particularly on top of the placement or accents of each one of these notes to get that whole thing to work for you. So what happens in the end is you just end up learning so much when you really focus and get this together, because you're kind of forced to get it right. And then it also reinforces other things, like just your basic knowledge of the chord goes up a notch, because you're having to think of so many different things at once. So get this one down, play it on the backing track, run it through all the keys, come back, and we'll come back and start subtracting the thirds. In this next exercise, what we're going to do is subtract all of the thirds from each one of these diatonic triads from the Lydian mode. So again, if we go through all of these and look at what the result is going to end up with when we subtract the thirds. So if I take the first one, this is a C major triad. I subtract the third, which is the E, and I end up with this fifth. Okay. The next one is a D major. subtract the third, so I end up with this fifth here. The next one is E minor. I subtract the third, which is the G, so I end up with this fifth, E to B. The next one is F sharp diminished. I subtract the third, so I end up with this, which is a flatted fifth. I then go to the G, I subtract the third, and I end up with this fifth here, across like that. I then go to the A minor, I subtract the third, and I end up with this fifth here. I go to the B minor, I subtract the third, which is the D, and I end up with this fifth. And then I'm back to the C major. I take out the third, which is the E, and I have this fifth here. So what happens is we end up with those fifth intervals. But what happens is, because the rhythm is the way that it is, we're going like this. Up to the top. It is in a way to actually visualize this, because of that rhythmic displacement. It's a little bit easier to think that I'm going up to this fifth, but back down, descending to a fourth. Going up to this fifth, descending back down to the fourth. Going up to this fifth, descending back down a fourth. Going up this fifth, descending back down a fourth. Going up this fifth, descending back down a fourth. Up this fifth, descending back down a fourth. Up this fifth, back down a fourth. Up this fifth. Okay? So you end up with this. When we come back down, what starts to happen is that we are just going up in fifths the whole way back down. But what, again, it's a little bit of a perception thing, is that it's kind of easy to think of it as descending sixth. So if I'm here and I'm descending down, that's a minor six, there's a major six. So it's all diatonic sixths, the way that it looks on the fretboard, and also the way that it's coupled with the actual rhythm. So the idea with this is that I'm going like this. Do it one more time. If I count that, it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Real slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Okay, get this down. This is a tricky one. This is when you subtract the thirds really over all the chord types. It's a little bit tricky because of these interval leaps, but really focus in and spend the time that it takes to really inculcate that information into your subconscious memory. Once you just kind of get into it, you'll understand, yeah, it's a little bit challenging, but it's good for you, and you'll get it down. Play along with the backing track, learn it in every key, come back, and we'll start to dissect these triads a little further by subtracting the fifths. In the next exercise, what we're going to do is the same principle, but we're just going to go up the triad, and we're now going to remove the fifth from each one of those diatonic triads within the Lydian mode. So again, let's analyze what we've got. We've got the C major triad. If I take away that fifth, I'm left with the root and the third. If I go up to the D major triad, I take away the top note, which is the fifth, and I'm left with the root and the third of the D major triad. I go to the E minor triad, take away the top note, I'm left with the root and third of the E minor triad. I then go to the F sharp diminished, take away the fifth, which is the top note, I'm left with the root and the third. Go to the G major, take away the top note, which is the fifth, and I'm left with the root and the third. Go to the A minor, take away the top note, which is the E, and I'm left with the root and the third of the A minor triad. Go to the B minor, take away the top note, which is F sharp, and I'm left with the root and the third of the B minor triad. And now I'm back to the major triad from the root, take away the fifth, and I end up with the root and the third here. So basically what we're doing is we're starting here and we're ending here. This is on the downbeat because the actual root of each one of these chords falls on the downbeat at the beginning of these phrases. So this is on the downbeat, whereas the first exercise we did was on the offbeat. So that's something to look at throughout and really understand the whole formula with every single one of these exercises, so you're kind of really not you don't have any sort of murky areas of understanding. That's the kind of key with that. So here, if I've got this, I'm going so if we then count that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you listen to these rhythms, like something that just came into my mind as I was playing this is that old Duke Ellington tune, if it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And it really has these, if you go listen to that track, it has these rhythmic accents in it, and it's really indicative of the jazz language, these polyrhythms, and this is really truly the place to start with it, so you can start really understanding those accents of the first of every 3/8 notes rather than the first of every 2. If you think about rock and pop, the accents are on the first of every 2/8 notes. So that just gives it a downbeat feel, and it just gives it a clear down and upbeat kind of feel, but there's no syncopation. Once you start accenting every three, everything changes, and just so much of the vocabulary of jazz is based on this rhythmically. Many people don't get this, and they try to play jazz with that classical or pop or rock rhythm, which is just accenting it on the strong beats, and it sounds weak. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like the masters. So, and whenever they play with certain people, they get lost rhythmically because they can't hear it, and they just equate it to, oh, those guys are just playing outside or something like that. It doesn't really work like that. There's a system to it, so you've got to practice it to get used to it. So work on these, do it in every key, come back, and what we're going to do is take the whole thing in reverse and play all of these triads in a descending fashion. In this next set of exercises, what we're going to do is we're going to do the whole thing in reverse. So what we're going to do is take all these triads within the Lydian mode, and we're going to play them all descending. So if I start off here, I've got the C major triad descending, I've got the D major triad descending, I've got the E minor triad descending, I've got the F sharp diminished triad descending, I have the G major triad descending, I've got the A minor triad descending, I have the B minor triad descending, and then the C major triad descending. So real slow, I'm going to play that up. Then start going back down. And that's what we end up with. So what we need to do with this, like all the other exercises, we need to count it, we need to play it in eighth notes, so we bring out that natural accent of the first of every 3 eighth notes. So it gives us that real cool sound, characteristic sound of the jazz rhythm concept, which is different from rock, classical, and pop music. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's slow that down. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So try to take it right down in speed. This is going to help you to kind of nail this and get this together. So practice this, do it over the backing track, go through every key, make sure that you've got it comfortably. Some of those fingerings are a little tricky when you're playing those descending, going up and then bringing that back down. And come back, and then we'll start to dissect these individually through subtracting the roots, the thirds, and the fifths in a descending fashion. In this exercise, what we're going to do is start by subtracting the roots. Now, because the triad is turned around, the root is the last note that occurs. So this exercise, when we start taking out all the roots, is actually going to start on the downbeat, as opposed to the previous set where when we subtracted the roots, it started on the upbeat. So that's something that you want to look at and understand how the formula for all these work. So I'm going to remind you every lesson so that you make sure that you understand that as you're progressing with these exercises. So if we take the C major triad, I'm going to subtract the root there. So I end up with the fifth and the third, which gives me that minor third interval. Okay, the next one is the D major triad. So I'm going to subtract the root, which is the D, and I'm going to end up with the A and the F sharp. Okay, so the next triad is going to be the E minor triad. And what's going to happen is I'm going to subtract the root, and I end up with the B and the G. Next triad is the F sharp diminished. So I'm going to end up subtracting that root, which is the F sharp, and it leaves me with the C and the A. Next triad is the G major. I'm going to get rid of the root, which is the G. It's going to end up with the D here, which is a minor third. The next triad is an A minor. Get rid of the root. I end up with the E and the C. This gives me that major triad there. Okay, next one is the B minor. Get rid of the root here. I end up with the F sharp. And then the D, which is another major triad. And then the last one is a C major. And I end up getting rid of the root, which is the C, and I end up with that G and the E. So now I'm descending up with diatonic thirds, starting on the third of the chord. We're actually starting on the fifth of the chord, resolving to the third of the chord. So what happens is that I've got this here. And then remember what I said, when I count this, this is falling on the downbeat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So again, this is a little bit different because you're descending, but we're just playing diatonic thirds, so it's not that big of a challenge intervallically. Not anywhere near as much as when we start taking out, subtracting the thirds from these things. So get this one down, do it in all the keys, play along with the backing track, come back, and we'll move on to that little bit more difficult one where we have to subtract the thirds. In this exercise, what we're going to do is subtract the thirds from the descending triads within the Lydian mode. So if we take every triad, we've got the C major, and then I'm going to subtract that third, which is the E. So that gives me this going down a fifth thing. Then the next one is the D major, and again I subtract the third, which is the middle note, and so I'm playing that top note and that bottom note. Okay, so then I go to the E minor, subtract the middle note, which is the third, and I end up with the top note to the bottom note, or that B to the E is going down in fifths. Okay, then the next one is the F sharp diminished. Okay, I get rid of the third, so now I've got this diminished fifth here. Okay, next one is the G major. Subtract the third, so I end up with the top note to the bottom note, which is the D to the G. Next one is A minor. Get rid of the third, which is C, so I've got E to A. Next one is the B minor. Get rid of that third, so I've got F sharp to the B. Okay, and then I've got the C major. Get rid of the third, and I've got the G that goes down to the C. Now, again, they're all fifths, but what happens is that when you go up this, it kind of looks, because of the rhythm displacement, it looks like you're moving up more in six, diatonic six, because when I go down to the root of the first chord, I go 5 to the root. When I go up to the fifth of the next chord, it's a diatonic 6 up, and then I go back down to that root, and then the fifth of the next chord is going to be the B going to the E, and you see how that looks like a diatonic 6 going up. So it's a perception thing that's going on here with this, and some people like to see it like this, or find it easier if they visualize it like this than seeing it as all descending fifths. It's because of the displacement of the rhythm. You try your own methodology as well with it. Try both ways, see what works for you. And as long as it's working, that's the main thing. So if I'm here and I'm going up the arpeggios, or up the fretboard with these descending 5 to 1s within each one of these descending arpeggios, what I've got is this. Okay, so one more time. So then what happens when we go back down is that it's kind of like descending fourths. Okay, so when I'm here, I finish off with going to the C major. The next one is going to be coming back down to the B minor. So what happens is that as I'm going up here, that brings me back down to the B. See, it's all descending fifths throughout the entire thing, but if I think of this as ascending fourths, that's kind of how it's perceived, or a way that it can be perceived. So work with that and see what works for you. So if I play that whole thing, it goes like this. Again, we got to learn to count this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Get this down. This is a tough one. Just work very slowly with it. It can take some time to kind of get these together. So work with this, and we're going to move on to the next one after this, which is the subtraction of the fifths. But make sure that you're getting this down in every key. In this last exercise, what we're going to take a look at is subtracting the fifths from all of these descending triads from the Lydian mode. So if we take a look at this, I've got the C major triad. I've got the fifth on the top, so it's the top note that we're removing. So we're going to subtract the top note of each one of these triads, and it's going to leave me with the third and the root from each chord. So if I have that C major, get rid of the G, I'm left with the E and the C. If I have the D major, get rid of the fifth on the top, I'm left with that F sharp and the D. The E minor, get rid of the top note, I'm left with the G and the E. Okay, go to the F sharp, diminished, get rid of the top note, I'm left with the A and the F sharp. Take the G major triad, which is next, get rid of the top note, and I'm left with the B and the G. Take the A minor triad, get rid of the top note, and I'm left with the C and the A. Then the B minor triad, get rid of that top note, I'm left with the D and the B. And then I have the C major triad, get rid of the top note, and I'm left with that E and the C. And I might alter how I play that because it makes it more positionally for the B triad. I might just play that there so I get everything positionally here. Okay. So the idea behind this is that when we're looking at this one, because we're getting rid of the fifth, which is on the downbeat, this exercise falls on the upbeat. Okay, so if we looked at the subtraction of the fifths in the on the ascending version, what happened is that falls on the downbeat. Okay, so the idea is that here we've got our fifth on the downbeat, so it's going to start on the upbeat. So it's going to go like this. 1. So again, if I count that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so get all this together. Go back and review all of the different exercises. Make sure you've got them down in every key. Go back and start reviewing the old chord types as well. You've got to do that. You can't just go through each successive lesson. You could ostensibly do that and end up at the end not knowing anything. So you've got to go back and review and maintain some things, especially while you're on a new study. Okay, while you're on a new study, that helps it so when you go into a newer study, then you can then have less maintenance in the background than if you were trying to kind of go through it and not really maintain things as you're going through the actual new study. So get this together, play along with the backing track, learn it in every key, come back and we're going to do a quick debrief before we go. That just about wraps up today's lesson, but before we go, let's take a look at what we've learned. At the end of today's lesson, we've learned a detailed methodology for understanding polyrhythms over major seventh chords. We also learned how to phrase lines rhythmically for added interest in your bass lines and your solos. We then took a look at an easy system for understanding how to count and feel these polyrhythmic and syncopated phrases correctly. As always, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively. I'll be checking in with you next week for Lesson 4. So until then, take care.